policy practice group meeting / webinar today. Really excited. It looks like we have over 40 people here already, so that's really great. We have, as everyone knows, our special guests here today, Sam and Trey, who we'll introduce in just a moment. But as we are kind of having everybody join us and starting the conversation, if people want to drop introductions into the chat, that would be great. Just name and where you're from, what you're working on, anything you want to add in the chat, feel free. And so I will be kind of facilitating our meeting today. My name's Anna. I work at the Environmental and Energy Study Institute, and excited to have this conversation with everyone. Thanks, Beth, for getting the chat going. And so we'll let everyone take a moment here to introduce themselves. So I'll just pause and then we'll get back into things. The way today is going to run is that we are going to spend most of our time having a discussion, but we're going to start off with a little introduction from ASAP staff, and then we're going to roll into our brief presentations from Trey and Sam. And then we're going to have plenty of time for questions for Trey and Sam, as well as a discussion where we're hoping that many of you will be able to chime in with adaptation priorities that you have in your mind from the work that you're doing that would be important for staff on Capitol Hill to know about. And so we'll make sure that we have as much time as possible as we conclude to have that conversation. But with that, I think, thanks everyone for introducing yourselves in the chat. If you haven't yet, feel free to keep doing that. And I'll pass it over to Rachel for some more introduction.
Hi, everyone. My name is Rachel Jacobson. I'm the Deputy Director at ASAP. And I also want to call out that Anna is one of the leaders of our policy group, the host for this webinar, and we'll be kind of pointing out a few more of our policy group leaders as we go on today. So in case this is anyone's first ASAP event, we just want to be mindful of that. And I'll take just a minute here to share some highlights of the ASAP network structure and activities. So as you know, ASAP is here to connect and support you as a climate adaptation professional, bringing together members so that we can collectively advance innovation and excellence in the adaptation field. And here at ASAP, we believe that climate change is a real and serious danger to all sectors and systems, that adaptation and resilience build stronger, more prepared communities, ecosystems, and economies, and that equity and environmental justice must be centered in all of the work that adaptation professionals do. And at ASAP, it's really all about the people. And our people, all of you, are spread across the US and Canada, as well as all sectors. And these are just a few of the faces of ASAP members who inspire one another every day to do that critical adaptation work on the ground. And so what binds us all together and defines us as adaptation professionals is integrating projections about future climate conditions into our day-to-day work. And really importantly, both giving to and getting from the ASAP network. And as we're all experiencing, the adaptation field is really growing by leaps and bounds every year. There are a ton of incredible organizations doing this work. And so at ASAP, we're not here to reinvent the wheel. Rather, we're operating as an intermediary organization to bring together disparate people and groups and unite them around shared principles and practices and goals. And so while we're structured like a professional association, we mostly operate as a social impact network. And that means that everything we do is with, by, and for you, our members. And it functions on values like reciprocity, open access to information, something for every member, and most importantly, trust. And we're really trying to build trust amongst ourselves to support collaboration so we can make more and better change together. One of the key mechanisms that we use to connect members is our member-led interest groups. And our longest standing member-led interest group is our policy group. So through various iterations of the ASAP policy group through the years, really hundreds of members representing all sectors and area of expertise in adaptation have come together to share what's working on the ground, identify needed changes in the policy space, and work together to influence policy decisions at the local, state, tribal, federal levels, really all scales. And that includes drafting a transition memo to the Trump administration in January 2017. It includes crafting a brief on policy perspectives on financing infrastructure for climate adaptation and resilience. It includes providing input to the House Select Committee on the Climate Crisis Report, which of course is going to be one of the foci of today. And it also includes our policy message toolkit that we launched this past spring. And we just have a couple of members here on the line today that will give some insight into how ASAP members work together to achieve a couple of the really critical outputs on this list. And first, I just want to, I'll ask Josh Foster to share a little bit of insight on the transition memo that members put together for the last presidential administration. Hey, Josh.
Yeah, thanks, Rachel. I've been involved in ASAP since early on, and also helped establish the policy committee and policy practice group in 2019. So I'm glad this group is this seminar is meeting at this moment. I wasn't heavily involved in the transition memo in 2017, but we decided to do our best and give a memo to the incoming Trump administration, focusing on issues that we thought were sort of safe in the climate realm and were of sort of mutual interest between ASAP and the administration. So we emphasized what the adaptation challenges were, how mitigation and adaptation could be complementary, and to create co-benefits. We focused on resilient infrastructure, which is still a current issue, and we hope infrastructure will be more of an issue through this administration. We focused on security issues, natural resources, and then sort of a catch-all of agriculture, fire, and water issues. And then we offered up ASAP as a help from ASAP to the administration, saying we're happy to work with the administration, develop policy initiatives. It was kind of whistling into the wind to some degree, but I think that sort of laid the groundwork for ASAP putting things into the policy process. And then through time, through the ASAP network, we helped engage the Hill a little bit better, Capitol Hill. And then when the select committee came up, we actually had previous relationships with some of the staff, including the legislative director or the staff director and Samantha, who's going to be talking later. So that is a value of ASAP in the policy realm, that we have this ability to connect in DC and put these policy initiatives forward. So we
Thank you so much, Josh. Yeah,
be better in this with this administration transition.
And thanks, that's Rachel. A perfect, yeah, thank you. And that's a perfect segue. I'm going to have Tanya Graham speak a little bit about the process for providing input to the House Select Committee report. So thanks.
Yes, thank you, Rachel. So when the House Select Committee on the Climate Crisis put out their request for information, we recognized immediately that this was really a place where ASAP could bring forward some of those far-reaching, longer-term policy requirements sort of for the field. But it was difficult because there are so many members across the country coming at this from so many different perspectives. And so the question was, how do we bring that all together in a coherent set of recommendations? So ASAP put out, we took everything out from the call for the request for information that related to adaptation, created questions out of that, put it out to the membership of ASAP, and then asked people who wanted to work on the working group that would pull it all together. And through that process, we had some fantastic people step forward and agree to take on certain elements and pull all of that feedback together on the different questions. And then we basically sewed it all together, and we're so pleased with the depth and the sort of the comprehensive nature of the report that came out of it, and what the staff in DC did with the comments that ASAP put forward. So with that, I'll hand it back, Rachel.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Tanya. And really briefly, before I turn it over to our main speakers for today, I just want to recognize the folks who played really key roles in the other items on this list. So in the finance brief, we had Carl Schultz, George Haddow, Lisa Granquist, Ira Feldman, and Nat Lichten. And working on our policy message toolkit, which launched this spring and was all about putting out messages that ASAP members could use to advocate for inclusion of adaptation and resilience measures in COVID relief. Miles Gordon, Anna McGinn, John Phillips, and Joel Smith So thank you so much. And really that's all to demonstrate that this only happens, these things only happen when ASAP members come together and when ASAP members show leadership to do this work. This year, we are reinvigorating our efforts via the renewal of the policy group for our member-led interest group formation process. And we are looking for people to join the group, volunteer for leadership roles, and work with us to find new ways to engage with the policy process, including developing more opportunities for direct contact with folks on the Hill. We have some opportunities for that coming up just this month, just in the next week or two, and as well as creating additional tools such as an organization-wide policy platform that ASAP members can use to advocate for the strong policies that we need to enable us to achieve our shared goal, which is really to build climate resilience for communities, ecosystems, and economies across the country. So my email, or John's email, is here. He is one of the key leaders in the policy group currently. You can email him if you want to get involved in the group. We'll also share links to all the products that we just mentioned so folks can peruse those at will. And I'm going to turn it back over to Anna now.
Awesome. Thanks, Rachel. So that's obviously a great segue into the main conversation that we're going to be having today about two major reports that came out of both the House and the Senate over the last year, focused on the climate crisis really broadly. So these, I'm sure most people on the call have had a chance to look at the reports, but they're both very comprehensive roadmaps laying out what federal action is possible on climate change. And so we're going to have Trey talk about the Senate Special Committee on Climate Change, and then we're going to have Sam jump in and talk about the House Select Committee on Climate Change. So Trey Reffett served as senior advisor for housing, or serves, I'm sorry, as senior advisor for housing and infrastructure for Senator Brian Schatz of Hawaii. With the office since 2017, he supports the senator's work on the Senate Transportation, on the committee. He supports senators' work on the Senate Committee on Banking, Housing, and Urban Affairs, Committee on Commerce, Science, and Transportation, and Transportation, Housing, and Urban Development Appropriations Subcommittee. Sorry, Trey, that's a mouthful. His work focuses heavily on addressing the unique housing and transportation challenges facing the people of Hawaii, as well as neighborhood and community development, disaster response and recovery, transit-oriented development, smart growth, transportation tech, infrastructure, flood control, and community resilience. Trey served as senior advisor to the Secretary and Acting Deputy Assistant Secretary for Congressional and Intergovernmental Affairs at the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development from 2015 to 2017. And before that, from 2007 to 2015, Trey worked as senior advisor for Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid. Trey is a Central Illinois native and is a graduate of Chicago's DePaul University and Northwestern University. Trey, we're so excited to have you here today. Thanks so much for your comments. We're looking forward to them.
Anna, thank you so much for the warm introduction. Everyone, thank you for having me. Again, my name's Trey. I work for Senator Brian Schatz of Hawaii. He is the chair of the Senate Committee on the Climate Crisis and responsible for bringing together this report. I work, as Anna mentioned, on transportation, housing, and infrastructure for Senator Schatz, and his vision of his policy visions for those are really establishing place and how the built environment affects the lived environment, and the lived environment shapes the built environment, how we need to improve federal policies to incentivize communities to make that as functional as humanly possible. So very much in line with everything you're doing. The report that we're talking about today, at least on our side, was intended to be a visioning statement for the Senate. Unfortunately, it started off as a partisan document. There was an intention to have this as a formal committee, but unfortunately, we had to rely on the Senate Democrats, so it became more of a caucus document. And it is a opportunity for the Senate Democrats to make a clear statement on what their intention is over the next year and over the next decade and really going forward. It is a big statement, but it's one that's common sense. It is that the climate crisis is enormous, and we have an incredible sense of urgency to act. That no part of our community is protected from the climate crisis, and we need to think about climate change and how we react to climate change in everything we do. And that just doesn't mean a whole of government effort. That means a whole of community effort. So you'll see throughout the document that we speak to every area of life, whether that's the financial sector, whether that's agriculture, how our food is made, how we treat public lands, and specifically how we create, shape, and protect communities, and that is both housing and transportation. For too long, and you guys all know this, that climate change and the need to act to prevent catastrophic damage resulting from natural events was seen as an obligation. It was something that is forced upon us, and it's medicine that we're going to have to swallow. But the purpose of this document is to say that, yes, we have an obligation to act, and to act with urgency, but that's really an opportunity. It's an opportunity because most of the solutions that we need to embrace are things that we needed to do absent the climate crisis. And that's because climate action is not at odds with the lived experience, but it enhances and embraces the need to the lived experience. It is at its core accessibility, equity, and environmental justice. And that requires us to recognize that the built environment cannot be at odds with the natural environment, but it needs to be made with a recognition of the natural environment and a responsiveness to the natural environment. Otherwise, we are constantly fighting a fight that we will never win. Our policies on the financial sector, on transportation, on housing, need to promote durability. Everything we do needs to be done with an eye for the risks associated with failure. We need to make sure that we're advancing policies that make people safer and people healthier. But again, that's not something we would do outside of climate change. That is a core responsibility as government practitioners to promote. So all the investments that we need to make to respond to climate change are investments that we had an obligation to every member of our society to make anyway. So that's why this is such an exciting time, even though we have such real peril in our not too distant future. I come from a small town in central Illinois. And what has always struck me is looking at historic Main Street as a model for how our communities should live to be the most resilient and the most durable. You have a Main Street that centers the needs of a community first, and then moves to the wants of the community. You have economic development, you have workforce housing in close proximity, you have social services in close proximity, and then building out that community from that core idea. Those historic Main Streets were designed based on necessity, but that is a message that we should continue on to the future, because that is, again, an obligation that we have in order to ensure that our communities throughout the country, whether it's in the coast or in the heartland, are safe, healthy, and vibrant in the face of climate change. So looking at the report that we have, again, it's further common sense solutions. It's acknowledging that we need to have moonshot investments in R&D and major infrastructure, but also small changes to both behavior and current programs will reap huge rewards, whether that's investing in safe housing, whether it's investing in safe streets that allow multimodal transportation, whether that's investing in flood prevention infrastructure that is not constantly under attack by its environment, but acknowledges it and has a much longer shelf life. So I'm going to stop right there, because I think I'm going to learn more from what you guys have to say in our conversation than you will from me going through a document that you guys have already looked at. But I really look forward to this conversation. I appreciate what you guys do on a day-to-day basis, and I'm excited that this report, the one Sam's going to talk about, is a signal that our government is now going in the direction that you have been asking us to go for a long time, and that is acknowledging what people all over the country and all over the world has been demanding that we do. So thank you.
Thank you, Trey. And I just want to take a moment to thank you and your whole team and the senator for your leadership on this work, because I think, you know, a lot of people have seen the last couple of years as kind of an opportunity to lay some groundwork for what may happen in the upcoming Congress. And I think these reports were really key to making that happen. So thank you. So next we're going to hear from Sam Medlock. Sam is Senior Counsel for the House Select Committee on the Climate Crisis, supporting the committee's work to advance climate science, adaptation, and resilience. Sam joined the committee from a private sector role in climate risk management, insurance, and finance. Previously, Sam was senior advisor in the Obama White House, coordinating across the Executive Office of the President and the administration to reduce the risks and costs of climate change and disaster. She has more than 25 years of experience in environmental, land use, and disaster law and policy, serving states, regional partnerships, and local governments. Sam is a Juris Doctor graduate with honors from Vermont Law School and earned a Bachelor's of Science summa cum laude from Texas Women's University. She served on the advisory committee for the Natural Hazards Center at the University of Colorado Boulder, taught coursework in resilience finance at the University of Cambridge Institute for Sustainable Leadership, and was an adjunct professor of law at the Santa Barbara and Ventura Colleges of Law. Sam, thanks so much for being here. We're really looking forward to your comments.
Thanks very much, Anna. And it's so great to be with you all. Really, really grateful for the incredible work that you all do every day, the extremely helpful input that you all provided in response to the Select Committee's request for information, and the opportunity to catch up with you all this afternoon or this morning, depending on where you are in the country. And I think that what I'd emphasize about where we are and where we're going with regard to the two products that are the subject of today's discussion is the ways that the Senate report and the Select Committee Majority Staff report operate together to be a roadmap for the Congress from the point that they were issued earlier this year, but certainly into the 117th Congress, and really lifting ambitions to be responsive to what practitioners need every day. And so, hearkening back to the input you all provided to the RFI, who better than your members to articulate the needs, articulate your capabilities, and tell the Congress what is most needed to confront the climate crisis, both through the lens of carbon mitigation and clean energy, and through the dimensions of adaptation and resilience and preparedness. Noting that these are not interchangeable terms. These have very specific meanings in practice. I'm going to provide an overview of the report at a very high level in the interest of time, because as Trey noted, we really want to hear from you all about your reactions to these reports and your priorities going forward. But to kind of set the scene through the recommendations that the Select Committee Majority Staff articulated in our report from June, I would emphasize that it was really a product of input from across the board that we heard from elected officials, from scientists and business leaders, from public health advocates and policy experts, from youth activists and communities on the front line. And it's organized around pillars dealing with infrastructure and clean energy and environmental justice and public health. I'm really going to focus my summary around climate science, around adaptation and resilience, but just noting that these are pieces of a much broader policy platform. But in the interest of time, we really want to zero in on these particular pillars. First, pertaining to climate science, we recognize that there's a lot of work that's already been done in terms of foundational climate science, but a long way to go. So we do call for bolstering investments in climate literacy and education, workforce training, strengthening the federal scientific integrity, policies and processes, and protecting that integrity. For the Congress ourselves, we call to restore the Office of Technology Assessment to provide unbiased technical advice into Congress. With regard to climate risk information, we view that as foundational to everything else. We've really got to build that strong foundation of science. So we call for the establishment of a climate risk information service to gather data and information and to deploy actionable, defensible information that states, local governments, tribes, territories, the private sector, but also federal program managers can be relying on in the decisions that they make every day. We take a hard look at the day-to-day monitoring that's happening, whether it's through the stream gauge networks or tide gauge networks, atmospheric monitoring, but also feeding robust monitoring and data into models, and embedding that information into the design of codes and standards for the built environment, as well as the sorts of climate-informed valuations that Congress and the federal government need to be engaging in. So, for example, making sure that where the Office of Management and Budget in its regulatory or budget roles is engaging in benefit cost analysis, that those analyses are informed by the true and full scope of cost of a particular project or policy and the full range of potential benefits of a particular approach. But that I begin with that science basis because we really do view it as foundational and really the beginning point for everything else. On resilient communities and infrastructure, you see the Select Committee majority staff articulate a range of recommendations, including the establishment of a national climate adaptation program or initiative that really needs to take all that science and information and deliver technical assistance on the ground where it can be the most helpful. And taking a good body of work across the federal government in technical assistance and reforming that in a more robust model so that assistance is sustained and is multidisciplinary in nature and includes opportunities to help local leaders and infrastructure owners and operators deal with the additional costs that we know that they're going to be incurring, as well as the ongoing maintenance, for example, on infrastructure. That's got to be taking into account the additional stressors that the climate crisis will exert. And there are opportunities not only to look across the federal government at sources of funding and financing, but also to be tapping private capital and private investment. And so we really view that technical assistance as needing to be multidisciplinary, needing to be skilled technical assistance, and more than a site visit that'll produce a binder sitting on a shelf, but a more sustained relationship. I had mentioned codes and standards, and I want to emphasize that again. For example, looking at minimum wildfire and flood resilience codes to support federally supported projects. There needs to be a hard look at that. I don't think that'll surprise anyone participating in this briefing. We also want to look at ways to reduce disaster costs and accelerate recovery. So building on some of the work that we see FEMA do, for example, through BRIC, or the Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities work that they've already got underway, there needs to be extremely robust investment in pre-disaster hazard mitigation, and really helping strengthen housing, strengthen infrastructure, and make better integration of these services that natural resources that are intact and functioning and healthy can be providing to communities. We also took some additional time to reflect on what the pandemic has to teach us about community resilience. And you see us articulate a body of recommendations around public health and managing risk to health infrastructure. Some of our research was really eye-opening about the physical vulnerability of our nation's hospitals and clinics and facilities supporting aging populations. We really see this playing out with the way that that COVID and record-breaking wildfire and hurricane season have collided in ways that are resulting in real impacts on the ground and exacerbating losses across the board. We also took a hard look at the ways that underlying and systemic social vulnerability, racist practices like redlining, are feeding into disproportionate impacts both to COVID and to extreme weather and climate. So you see us lift up a body of recommendations around prioritizing the needs of vulnerable communities, of communities of color, and really calling on the Congress to embed those assessments and those priorities into everything that's done. I want to bring us across the finish line quickly just to talk about some next steps in terms of what we see coming into the 117th. Of course, the Select Committee on the House side, our authority is wrapping up at the end of the 116th Congress. We do anticipate that there will be a widely recognized need for continued work in the House, and that this is a need that's acknowledged and really recognized by leadership. But I don't want to get out ahead of any decisions or announcements that may be coming. Just suffice to say that there's a real effort toward implementing these recommendations and continuing to work in the Senate as well as with the incoming administration. So as we talk about the 117th and beyond, you know, I'm going to be talking about this in a forward-looking way without getting out ahead of any announcements about a potential future select committee in the House. But that's really where I want to wrap up and get to your questions in this discussion, because where I think you all could be the most helpful is sharing with Trey and me your reactions to what we put forward and your priorities going forward to define what we should be taking on and the kind of work that we should be pursuing with the incoming team in the White House. So thank you. Thanks very much.
Thanks so much. And thank you to Chair Castor and to your whole staff. I know that this has been a really significant effort on the part of the entire committee. So it's certainly very much appreciated on our side as well. So we have a lot of people on this call. We have over 80 people. So if you want to ask a question, I think what's going to be the easiest thing is to just make a note in the chat that you want a chance to unmute yourself. You don't need to write your whole question. Just let us know in the chat that you'd want a chance to make a comment or question. And we'll try to have everyone be as concise as possible so that we can make sure as many people can have an opportunity to speak. So as people are making notes that they have questions, I wanted to first go to Beth Gibbons for her thoughts as ASAP's executive director.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thanks so much, Sam and Trey, for being here and for the work that went into both of these reports. I really appreciated the relationship that I feel like ASAP has been able to develop with each of you and with your committees over the last year and couple of years. And I think that there's a lot of energy right now, and and there's optimism, which is an amazing thing to be feeling, especially in a field which is, we're people that look at the future and admit that there are challenges and operate with this pragmatism. And so to be bolstered with this optimism of what could be coming is really, it's an amazing feeling. For us, as we're looking for these key recommendations, I really appreciate the focus on justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion, the explicit discussion of how climate adaptation and any of these policies have to address historic injustice and really bringing forward the way in which we protect our most vulnerable communities. And then the science and the codes, because the way in which we standardize this really helps to support local action, state action, but also the private sector, which is looking for a signal, and standardization is a great signal for them to be able to advance. I have a couple of questions for you. One is, you started to allude to this, Sam, and I know you don't want to get out in front of it, but I'm gonna push on it anyway. We've seen a lot of reports. A lot of people in this call have been working on climate adaptation and climate change work for decades. What can we hope is going to happen from this report to the incoming administration and incoming Congress, so we, as ASAP members, can help to support the messages that are in here that we know are really strong? How can we give you our voice? How can we give you our support to keep this momentum? And so we don't need to reinvent and rewrite this report for another year, right? Like, we've got a report, we've got recommendations. What can we do? And where would you like to see our influence to make sure the connections are happening to the 117th and to the new administration?
I'd be happy to get us underway, and I'd love to hear from Trey on this as well. I think that this is a particular moment where there's perhaps unprecedented recognition for leadership in the Congress and across the career professionals across the administration, and that not all the answers are to be found in Washington, right? And it reminds me of the moment, for example, where President Obama stood up the state, local, tribal leaders task force on climate preparedness and resilience, in recognition that federal policy is best informed by the intel, by the wisdom, by the lived experience of practitioners on the ground who really understand the way that some of these programs operate in sort of harmony that might not have even been planned, or maybe what often happens is they're operating at cross purposes. And I think that communities experience this in their day-to-day work, in efforts to try to navigate all the different federal programs and to prepare for disaster and recover from disaster, but deal with things in a way that's deeply human, right? So I think that this is an opportunity to hear from ASAP as an organization, and also to hear from your members specific priorities that you all think that the Congress should be taking on first, as we head toward the 117th. Of course, in the House Select Committee's recommendations, you see us in a 550-page document articulate more than 700 recommendations. That's a lot to take in and to take on board. And so I think that Speaker Pelosi and the Majority Leader, as well as Republicans and our colleagues in the Senate, could really benefit hearing from you all on where you think we should pursue action with the greatest urgency. And I would put it in maybe very quickly 3 sort of dimensions. One being, how can we embed adaptation and climate action into the economic recovery that the nation really must embark on and continue, right? So whether you want to call it stimulus or a recovery package, but what are those things that in your view will both propel economic recovery and move the dial toward a more resilient nation? and as much specificity as possible there. A second lens I think that is going to be very important both on the Hill and in the incoming administration is going to be environmental justice. There is this moment in time that is now actually durable and sustained. There is a national dialogue around environmental justice that doesn't feel episodic. It feels real. It feels like it's got traction. And so I think hearing from you all with specificity, because it's one thing to talk about justice and equity, it's another thing to look at a specific program or a specific piece of legislation and say, here's where you've got to zero in on this. FEMA or EPA or HUD or whichever of those programs. I mean, one that I don't want to represent my colleagues or my bosses or any agency, but I do think that there are opportunities, for example, to look at BRIC, the FEMA program, and see where we can improve the performance there. The last area is going to be economic recovery through the lens of job creation, especially local jobs, the creation of life-sustaining quality jobs. And I think adaptation is a particular area of opportunity there so that we're building good paying jobs where they're most needed in communities. But hearing directly from you all on those things would be extremely helpful.
Yeah. Well, I'll step back so others can, Trey, yeah.
Yeah, if I can just add in, I think Sam hit them all, the priorities well. Particularly the prioritization. I would also add, because you all are practitioners, a focus on identifying how silos within state, local, and federal programs limit or hinder our ability to address this. Because a lot of those can be handled on the administrative side and won't, small tweaks by the incoming administration. And that's where there's real value if both the administration hears that and then Congress can show signs of support for small changes that encourage cross-agency collaboration in supporting what you guys do on a daily basis and reduce any roadblocks for you guys to affecting the change that you guys want to affect.
Awesome. Well, I just want to throw out there, I've said this before to you, Sam, and I'll offer it to you, Trey, as the next Congress comes in, if there's an opportunity for ASAP and ASAP members to join you to talk about what is adaptation, what are adaptation professionals, what do careers look like in this space, we'd love to make that happen. I know that adaptation is desperately needed and often wildly understood, essentially. And so whatever we can do to support that learning, we're available for it. And Anna, thank you so much for letting me hop in here. I can't wait to hear other thoughts and questions.
Yeah, of course. Thanks, Beth. Okay, so we have a number of people who want to jump in here. So I'm thinking maybe we'll take a couple questions and then we can jump back over, or questions and comments, and then we'll jump back over to Sam and Trey for the reaction. So Gabriel, Jason, Valerie, if the three of you want to jump in and ask your questions or make your comments, that'd be great.
Thank you, Anna, and thank you, Samantha and Trey, for participating. I just was skimming over this amazing kind of manuscript of recommendations, and one of the things that kept popping up is workforce development, and it often the recommendations start with Congress should do X, Y, or Z, and I'm wondering where would someone, for instance, a local workforce development board, if they were interested in kind of helping workers get jobs in critical infrastructures that may be directly impacted by climate change, where would these individuals go in order to kind of help define how to get workers into these kinds of critical jobs? Either one is, or state.
So I would say that this is an example of how the idea of climate action needs to be demystified and not seen as only moonshot programs. And needs to be instead at the core of everything the federal government does in order, whether that's national competitive grants or funding or policies that are implemented at the state and local level. An example would be the local workforce investment boards, which are funded by the federal government, and are directed to specifically look at the way their functions encourage workforce development towards adaptation. And that's something that Congress can do in an appropriations bill and a reauthorization bill or administratively. And that's just one example that we can do. The Department of Labor funding workforce investment programs, the Department of Education ensuring their pathways to work programs include and encourage that, whether that's just on a delineated list of eligible activities or a stated purpose or a focus for a competitive year. So it is looking at programs that you see on a day-to-day basis, and then raising up how climate response and adaptation can be inserted in there. A lot of the times, staff are at the congressional level and even at the federal level are so siloed and so focused on hitting their next goal of moving to the next appropriation year, getting through a reauthorization, that although they're looking to be dynamic, hearing that and just getting that idea raised to them is really starts big things in motion. So hearing from practitioners like yourself is pretty critical.
Thanks, Gabriel. Jason, did you want to jump in with your question or comment?
Yes, please. So great to see you, Sam. Great to see you, Trey, who's actually married to one of my sister's best friends in what is a really small world thing. So I have a comment and a question. The comment is, I've had similar calls about the new administration and the opportunities that are out there. And one of the things that keeps coming up, relates to capacity of communities, particularly those, low and moderate income communities, communities of color, just small communities that don't have staff. We're fortunate in Broward and some of our bigger cities, Miami-Dade, all these other, to have staff to work on this stuff. So one of the things that I've talked about in a couple of these is someone just funding someone, either for regional groupings or councils of government, regional planning councils, something to help particularly smaller and medium-sized communities actually apply for the grants and things that are already out there. And just, I don't know, like there's 330 million or so people in the United States. You had 330 people funded to do that across the country. I think that would help unlock a lot of resources potentially for, especially the communities that are less resourced. And I don't know how that would work. That's, I think, your jobs. But this is something that's come up, repeatedly that, sometimes unfortunately the program benefits accrue to those that have the resources to apply in the first place or access them. And my question then is, thank you so much for being on this call, but how do we continue to engage both as ASAP, but as individuals? I know Broward County has a huge interest in, getting in front of members of Congress, senators, and their staff. What's the best way to do that?
Sure, I could get us started. As folks who work with us on a kind of a day-to-day basis know, attention spans can be a bit short here on Capitol Hill. And so definitely conveying to us in kind of a pithy form is really useful. And so, things like, 1-pagers, 2-pagers, once we start getting into more detailed 10 and 20-page reports, while there's great value, and I can assure you staff will look at it, it's a little bit harder to get that in front of our members, but literally, writing into us, directing a reaction document or a priorities document, in our case with the Select Committee, towards Speaker Pelosi, and copying Chair Castor and Ranking Member Graves would be one way, or sending it in to Chair Castor and Ranking Member Graves. and then, you can always email it to me, and then I'll make sure it gets in front of who it needs to get in front of. But those types of written priorities documents are extremely helpful. And then as we look at organizing hearings, briefings for our members that tend to be more in that sort of knowledge transfer, kind of education for our members kind of space, we would look to folks like you all to either come provide testimony or to come brief our members on, for example, what are the adaptation, resilience, and preparedness priorities that the select committee in 2.0 or whatever that's going to look like should be thinking about going forward. One of the things that we're thinking about now also is the ways that a future entity like ours would be working in closer harmony with the Biden-Harris administration. And so I think, hearing from ASAP as an organization, but also hearing from your members on those priorities would be, super helpful. But I do think it probably starts with that written transmittal that we can start waving around and passing around across staff and our members would be a really great place to start.
And then just following on Sam's point, Jason, great question and great comment. Really appreciate that. So I think in terms of the interaction and the outreach, what, as Sam mentioned, written form, personalizing the issue so that, and humanizing the issue so that the members understand that this is not an esoteric problem that is trying to be solved, but is impacting the day-to-day lives of their constituents. And the value is that they want to be able to talk about it publicly, the work that they do to explain to their constituents more broadly why this is an important action. And it really lights the fire under staff and members to action. So having that articulation. I'd also say, do not feel like you need to have a complete answer. It is the staff's responsibility to understand how the federal government works. So don't feel like you need to have a complete picture before approaching a member. Have the problem generally well scoped out, and maybe suggestions towards an answer, but you don't need the whole picture, and you don't need complete data. Again, the humanization of humanizing the problem is far more effective at the staff level, because all that detail can be teased out as conversations continue. So don't be afraid to approach a member of Congress with that written statement of, here's my thesis, and here's the explanatory statement of why it's hitting our communities hard. I would also say on your point, the previous administration had a program that crossed departments, the Strong Cities, Strong Communities initiative that created targeted federal interest and assistance to certain communities based on a competition. And that targeted interest took the form of a federal official that then would be an advocate across departments for the actions that community would want to take. What you're suggesting, fits very well into that model, and highlighting that need is important, because unfortunately, members of Congress sometimes gravitate to legislative priorities or appropriations priorities that have a very quick outcome, something that sounds really great in a press release, and coordination and planning does not. So highlighting that need will be important. But that's a great suggestion.
So I think we have time for one more person. So Queen Ket, if you want to jump in with your comment or question, that'd be great.
Hi, everyone. So I'm right here from the Sea Islands and things like that. I'm so glad for day with all the 100 children, yet way you say. And so I am very interested in the statement that Ms. Medlock made about all those pages, because I have been engaged in numerous federal work. So I know you are truthful when you say 500 to 600 pages plus of documentation. I wondered within it, in this context, what is there in regard to the sustainability of cultural heritage communities? I'm from the Gullah Geechees of the Sea Islands, so you can see the background is where I live. So is there anything in there? If there isn't, what should we do to present that to you? And I would love to have your email address so that I can write the types of statements that we need, because you also made a statement after you said that about environmental justice. And a lot of times environmental justice dialogues in DC are reactionary instead of proactive work with cultural communities like mine that have been here since the 1500s, that have all of what you said is needed in terms of traditional knowledge that should be engaged in this. And we could use it to advance our cause ahead of time instead of coming in doing the cleanup that they usually think has to be done with EJ. So I'd love to have your email, and I'd love to know if there's something in there ready that addresses our communities, which would be considered BIPOC communities.
Right, absolutely. So we were so incredibly blessed and fortunate to have deep engagement over the year and a half or so in the development of the report to work with justice and equity and frontline communities, and to have the opportunity to hear direct recommendations and to translate that into the report. So the Select Committee Majority Staff Report is organized around pillars. And while there is one of those 12 pillars is specifically on environmental justice, and there's another one on labor and another one on clean energy, what we also did is we embedded justice and equity in every single pillar, every single recommendation, every single building block, because it's a systemic problem that needs a systemic and structural range of solutions. Just like resilience, justice and equity need to be embedded in the very heart of every federal action and investment. Absolutely. We also took the effort of looking specifically at small island settings, at indigenous communities, okay, at territories, and partners that don't always get reflected when we talk about state and local, right? We really need to be talking about communities, and we need to be talking about people. So please do take my email. I welcome the opportunity to work with you and draw your attention to some of those sections, excellent, but also to hear your reaction to some of those sections. What did we get right? What did we miss? What did we not what did we not include that we should have, and making sure that we hear directly from you on those priorities.
Wonderful. Could you drop the email, or can someone drop her email in the chat so that I can make sure I have it correct, please? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And just to follow on, similar to the House report, there was an intentionality in recognizing that the impact on communities needs to be not a separate program, but fundamental to every point in the document. That we need to recognize not where we are today, but how we got to where we are today. What led to the shaping of the communities that we're trying to now address. That we can't just wave our hands at the past and say, I'm sorry that you guys are, that your neighborhoods were built where they are, but now it is, the climate crisis is too important to, and we need to move everybody. We can't do that. We need to understand what drives people to make the decisions of where they locate, where they live, and where they work. That is not purely economic. That is not purely data driven. And that's the case in every community. That is, not unique to coastal communities. That is a core part of the human experience. So we need to recognize that within the policies that we make, that people are going to make decisions that make sense to them and that are the right decision to them. And that is not, that doesn't necessarily come through on a spreadsheet. So that's why, although we do have an EJ section, that it really is embedded throughout the document. But again, I assumed that we missed something because all our perspectives are limited to, you know, we all have limits of information, so it's essential to hear from others that have that caught something that we missed, so we can make those changes.
Trey, Sam, thank you so much. This has been a wonderful conversation, and we really appreciate your presentations. We have a very lively chat here, so I'm sure that ASAP staff is going to capture all these ideas to share with you. And to anyone who wasn't able to ask their question, I'm sure that Brianna's about to tell you how you can continue to give your input to ASAP so that we can make sure that all of it gets to Sam and Trey and their teams. But with that, I will pass it back over to the ASAP staff. And thank you again, Sam and Trey, for a really wonderful conversation.